Thank you, Marjorie. Thank you to the Texas Society of Architects and AIPP for the opportunity to speak tonight. It's always really great to be forced to step back from the day-to-day of projects and think a bit more broadly about what we're doing and why. Thoughtbarn marked 10 years last year as a creative enterprise. And in that time, we figure that we've worked on about 20 public art projects while working on more than 100 buildings. And one of the observations often made about our work is that it's diverse. And that's true. Our project types are very varied. And at any one time, we might be working on an office building, a house, a lighting installation, a community garden. But there is a set of investigations or interests that really tie them together and make a common thread across them. And we had a go at defining what we think those are. So one is building in an efficient and resourceful way. Another is being inventive with materials and the way that they go together. Another is recognizing that making can be a community act and create kind of social connections in itself. And the other is kind of connecting to the stories and narratives that make a place and that give people an identity with where they live and visit. So this evening, we're going to share 5 projects that we've done in the last 5 or 6 years that we think are some of the best examples of how we've been able to knit all of those interests together. And really one of the reasons that, as we're both trained as architects, one of the reasons we really love to do public art work is because we feel like these give us the richest opportunities to really bring all those things together. So 2012 in St. Louis, Missouri, in the Grand Center district of the city, we had the opportunity to create a temporary public installation on a vacant lot on the main thoroughfare through the neighborhood. The Grand Center is home to one of the highest concentrations of arts venues in the country. They've got 12,000 theater seats there and over 12 art galleries and museums. But the public spaces are really devoid of places to gather. They're big parking lots and wide car-dominated roads. And so our charge was to create something that would prototype how the district could be more, the public space could be more than just a place where you move from A to B, and instead act as a venue to bring people together. So in contrast to the hard edges and straight lines of Grand Center's urban form, we used watery metaphors, streams and deltas, pockets and eddies, in reference to St. Louis's location at the confluence of the Missouri and Mississippi rivers, to imagine an ephemeral space made from 25,000 feet of inexpensive macrame or macrame cord, which would draw people into it, slow them down, encourage encounters and an exchange of smiles. So macrame cord, what is that? It's more typically used for home craft scale projects like lawn chairs and rugs, for example. However, it's available in a wide range of colors. It costs just a few cents per linear foot, and it's designed for exterior use. So it was really an effective material to stretch our modest budget as far as it could go, which we worked out was a construction cost of $6 a square foot across the space. It's also a material that requires no technical skills to work with. It's lightweight, it can be cut with scissors and tied with simple knots. So it lends itself to being assembled by volunteers, another effective low-cost strategy. So we designed a framework of scaffolding and top and bottom plywood plates, which also created a palette of materials that could be totally recycled and repurposed at the end of the 6-week timeline. So we built the project ourselves with the help of over 100 volunteers. Those included a local CNC fabricator, teenagers from an after-school crafts program, local artists and architecture students, and crucially, a bunch of really enthusiastic middle school kids from the Arts Academy across the road. And they cut and measured over 2,000 lengths of cord following these really carefully scripted instructions about how to weave it in place. So they were climbing up and down ladders with us until the final hour. So in the 6 weeks that it was up, all kinds of interesting things happened. There was a youth orchestra that performed in it weekly to sidewalk audiences. People brought their lunch and set up picnics in it. And we also found a rehearsal of A Midsummer Night's Dream happening in there, where it was transformed into a forest of fairies. We did fear for the fragility of the piece, but when it was taken down, just 3 strings had come untied. Why no vandals or spoil sports? We can only speculate, but we like to imagine that when we use our public spaces as venues for participation and creativity, we collectively care for the common good.
2012, Manioc, Pennsylvania. A few weeks after the Grand Center project, we were asked to come and do a temporary public artwork that would bring the canal and its future kind of ecological restoration and investment to the public eye. So the canal was located right off of Main Street. It was a kind of water discharge for the Schuylkill River, I believe. And so along it, there was a hike and bike trail. So what we thought would be kind of fun was, let's bring the water up to kind of the public's, view. So we were also, we loved all the existing infrastructure that you can see in the canal, and we also took that as some inspiration. So our proposal was a series of kind of CNC routed plywood frames that would hold an undulating network of twisting clear PVC piping. Within that, to activate it, we were also asked to do an interactive installation. So to activate that, we were going to use very kind of off-the-shelf kind of motion sensors. We were going to attach those to each of the columns along the canal, and those would trigger sump pumps, which were emerged within the canal, and that would bring the water up in kind of this orchestrated manner through these tubes and kind of discharge it through the end. Next slide. We kind of thought it was this kind of green monster. When we presented this, everyone was like, but the water's so green. And we kind of felt that was kind of the purpose of the artwork in a sense. It was about really in this kind of this canal, the water quality changed a lot. So you would have, in certain time periods, it would be really clear water. And then in other time periods, it was kind of, really algae-filled, kind of dirty water. So that was really the kind of essence, again, to bring, the notion of this needing to be ecologically kind of restored kind of to everyone's, view. So next slide. So we became, in a sense, kind of master plumbers, in a sense. We had to investigate jacuzzi manifolds, which, all of our team became experts in the understanding of jacuzzi manifolds. And we also, had to learn how to install this kind of within a boat. So, throughout the series of 4 days, we installed, all of the plywood pieces that attached. We couldn't fix anything to the existing infrastructure. So again, our pieces kind of had to hug the existing supports. And next slide. So at night, it became this, illuminated kind of river monster that everyone, next slide, would kind of walk past. So when everyone walked past, it would, and at each of these, it would kind of initiate the water flow. Next slide. And then it would expel it at the end. So next slide. Next slide. We got a call like 4 weeks into it. They were like, this project is awful. And they were like, oh my God, it has turned green. What has happened? Why did all the the clear tubes turned green, and we were like, well, that was kind of, you know, part of our initial kind of, next slide.
2014 in Austin, another waterway project, one that probably some of you are familiar with. Waller Creek is due to undergo these high-profile, extensive renovations as part of a stormwater bypass project. Currently, none of the land around it can be developed because it's in the 100-year floodplain. We all know how much pressure there is on downtown to develop. So this huge stormwater bypass tunnel is taking that floodwater around and opening up the area along the creek for development, including this really visionary, wonderful linear park that's going to connect campus with Lady Bird Lake. So the Waller Creek Conservancy in 2013 approached a group of architects and artists to help them think about a public-centered art strategy that could, in the meantime, while this project, 6, 8, 10 years in the making, was underway, could create a reason for people, raise people's awareness of the project, be an excuse to bring them to the creek and start the kind of public awareness and dialogue about the project. In the words of Melba Watley, who's the chair of the Waller Creek Conservancy, she said, "The great challenge for us is to encourage people to think about Waller Creek as a place to go when there is really nothing for them to visit yet." So together with Murray, us, Burton Baldridge, Jason Sowland Design Workshop, as well as organizers Ingrid Spencer and Hope Hasbrook, we conceived of this concept of a weekend art show consisting of 5 installations that would all be light-based, happen at night along the creek, that would essentially do dual purpose or maybe more. They would bring people an excuse for people to visit the creek. By being along the stretch of the creek, they would cause people to walk along them. And by being lit up, they would transform what everyone perceives to be a dark, kind of intimidating place that really not very many people visit at this moment in time at all.
Our proposal was called High Water Mark. What the high water mark to us really represented the 100-year floodplain, in which was going to kind of go away, and it was going to be diverted because Waller Creek was diverting all the stormwater kind of out of that, that area. And so this 100-year kind of floodplain was no longer going to be there. So, of course, we were inspired by how water, you know, is resourced in Texas, you know, and also within the city. We also really like this image of this house going over the dam. Next. So we imagined this undulating kind of hydrological kind of flowing sculpture that would be hung from underneath this double curvature kind of vault on 7th Street. That's a really amazing kind of piece of kind of infrastructural architecture. Next. Next. What we soon realized was that that nice piece of infrastructure was also a habitat for bats. And in particular, in November was the mating season for all of those bats. So in each of the little crevices were little mating bats kind of making little twit noises and dropping back guano and, you know, stuff. And so we kind of, as always, had to figure out, you know, a new kind of methodology for how we're going to make this floating canopy. So this is kind of our adaptation of the structure. You know, we ended up making a structure that could find its support off of the sidewalk and would hold the canopy kind of up over it. So it was a series of, go back to it, a series of laser cut steel ribs, and it used electroluminescent wire were attached to each of those ribs. So next slide. This is just all of us installing it on a really cold day. No one fell in, which was really good because we didn't have any waiters on. Next. And this is kind of that 100-year floodplain mark, or the high water mark. Next. As it was imagined, kind of that night. next. Go ahead.
So on that opening night of the creek show, it was estimated that around 1,000 people walked along the creek together in these freezing cold temperatures. And that's probably 1,000 people who hadn't visited the creek before. So 2018 will be the 5th year that Creek Show has been held, and it's really become this key event in Austin for showcasing established and emerging talent in the field of public art. And with participation by, I think, over 25 groups of architects, artists, sculptors, filmmakers, landscape architects, each learning from and building on the ingenuity and mistakes of the past years. They've become responsible for thousands of Austinites experiencing the creek's potential as a public space and now looking forward to it being a place that they'll be able to go in the center of the city. So another 2014 completed project, and also another one that ties public art to urban amenities and existing infrastructure. This one was a commission from AIPP, and the call was to design what they called the first artist-led community garden in Austin. It was definitely an atypical call in that it didn't specify a recognizable artwork type, like a sculpture or a mural that they were looking for. Rather, it simply asked for an artist to integrate their perspective in the design and cultivation of the garden. So the project, which is located at a new YMCA, or then new YMCA in North Austin, was actually an institutional experiment on many levels, in defining a garden as public art, but also in making city-owned land available for community gardening and in growing food at a recreational facility. So we laid out the 25,000 square foot garden in a radial site plan with a gathering hub at its center under an existing tree. And each slice of the pie contains a different program. So there's a wheelchair accessible gardening area, raised beds for individual members, there's teaching and demonstration plots, a composting area, an area for a future playground. There's a public spine that invites everyone to enjoy the communal areas while the member beds are enclosed by a colorful sculptural fence. And there's a hybrid shade structure and tool shed that marks the entry to the garden and acts as a visual beacon from the YMCA and the parking lot. So during the project, we often found ourselves defending the value of artist involvement. Why call a community garden a work of public art? So in response to this question, retroactively, once it was finished, we developed a series of value propositions, which was our attempt to articulate why we felt that creative partnerships could help achieve community gardening goals of bringing people together, growing food, and encouraging civic stewardship. So these are a kind of explanation of these 8, what we call value propositions. Number 1, art activates the imagination. So none of the project partners, the YMCA, AIPP, the neighborhood association, knew how this initiative would unfold, but the idea of fusing public art and community gardening sparked this new imaginative space that generated this tremendous support for the project right from the get-go. Second, art elevates the ordinary. So rather than building a sculpture, we propose to treat the utilitarian garden infrastructure as the site of the art. How could the typically mundane elements of the garden, fence, garden beds, paths, and the tool shed be delightful and elevate everyday experiences? 3, artists can navigate uncertainty. So no less than 8 city departments had jurisdiction over this project, while the YMCA had to develop totally new management protocols. It meant delays and confusion in the permitting that could have disbanded the most dedicated of volunteer community groups. So we did feel that our creative problem-solving skills and knowledge of the technical process helped to navigate it through a lot of uncertain times in the beginning. Number 4, art as a communication tool. So to build interest in the garden, we developed illustrated site plans, renderings, flyers, a website, and signage. And these helped generate really rich community feedback in the beginning and a lot of buzz about the garden before it opened. Number 5, art changes the conversation. So during the design process, the most hotly contested topic was whether there should be a fence or not. So some people saw it as a really necessary security mechanism. Others felt like it was a barrier to inclusion and went against the idea of a community garden. And yet others felt that it was just a pragmatic regulator of respectful behavior. So what we challenged ourselves to do was to address all of these concerns, and we designed a sculptural armature that wound through the garden, leaving some areas open for teaching and gathering, while enclosing others like the member beds. So once this proposal was put forward, this either-or conversation of fence or no fence disappeared suddenly, and instead everyone became concerned with making sure it survived value engineering, which it did. Number 6, art is a barn-raising mechanism. So the fence also served a dual purpose in that it became this really great opportunity for a collective making exercise, a little bit similar to our Grand Center project. So we had over 100 volunteers also on this project, who also did a lot of the garden bed infrastructure, but also wove thousands of feet of this colored wire into the framework, again, following these kind of scripted instructions that we'd put together. So the enthusiastic participants included city workers, local apartment residents, seniors, chefs, artists, kids, and this Girl Scout group, who then also totally on their own initiative, constructed this little free library at the garden for sharing gardening books. We're almost there. Number 7, art as, as an additional funding stream. So community gardens are typically built on really tight budgets with funds raised by volunteers. And with this classified as a public art project, it was able to tap into these additional funding streams and create structures that really wouldn't have been possible just with volunteer funds. And then finally, art as a visual attractor. So on the day the registration system opened, all 50 beds were sold out within 4 hours. And when we asked the new members about their motivations, most of them simply said, we saw what was going on and we wanted to be a part of it. So we've come to think of this project as a case study that has broader relevance in how the placemaking arts and sustainable food advocates could really come together to amplify their collective impact in making healthy and vibrant neighborhoods throughout the city.
2018, Austin, Texas. This is our ongoing commission that we're kind of in the middle of. It's Onion Creek Fire Station. It's home to Austin Fire Department and EMS. The artwork opportunity initially was to create a fence structure that surrounded the kind of employee parking. In one of our first meetings, and what we've kind of learned over the years, we really asked, we were kind of blunt, and we said, what do you guys hate, when we were talking to the fire department and the EMS? We asked them, what do you really dislike about the public art that you might have seen or you might be experiencing? And what we received was pretty distinct feedback. I think they said that they wanted something really kind of low maintenance. They wanted something that wasn't too, how do they put it?
They didn't want anything literal, nothing that symbolized fire,
right,
and nothing that gave them extra work to do.
Exactly. Okay. Oh, that's me.
And I'll say one more thing, that at the same time, it was really specific in our brief that the artwork should reflect the dignity and importance of the work of AFD and EMS. So it felt important to us to make a work that had a very direct connection to what they did. And so Robbie will talk a little bit about how that evolved. Right.
So, you know, in doing our research, we kind of looked at what are the things that a fire person has to like learn or in the initial kind of as becoming a fireman, and what is this impossible thing. And we ran across these amazing images of where all of these firefighters really were coming together, and they were all struggling with the fire hose, right? We watched videos over and over on YouTube. I encourage you to do it. It's pretty funny. But watching them kind of wrestle with fire hoses, and they get out of the way. But it's an essential kind of task that each fireman has to learn how to accomplish together. So we use that as inspiration, and we also asked, well, what do they do with all of these extra fire hoses after they're decommissioned? So our team, Alex, kind of got in touch with the chief of the fire department, and he said, sure enough, we have tons of hoses, and that kind of fit into also, something that we could kind of reuse. Next. So we started to prototype, well, how are we going to use a fire hose as fence material? So we started looking at, well, maybe we'll start weaving it, but God, man, it still looks like a dirty fire hose that's been thrown away. Next. And so we said, well, what if we used these fire hoses as kind of formwork? What if we make, what if we pour concrete inside of those? And what we noticed with, the inherent kind of beauty of the fire hose, we got a couple that were kind of cut at the ring, and the hose, deforms back to an ellipse when it's cut because it doesn't have the pressure of water going through it. So we thought that was kind of a really kind of beautiful kind of form to look at. So then we started doing, as we normally do, some prototypes, So again, you could see there is the image I was just talking about. And sure enough, we kind of cut away this fire hose, and we have these snake-like kind of forms that are smooth on the outside that go from a 5-inch circle to an ellipse at the top. Next slide. And so we said, well, how can we make this more interesting? So we then looked at our other clients, so to say, which was the EMS, and we kind of asked the same question of the EMS. What do they have to learn as essential as part of their training? What do they have to kind of do to kind of everyone? And we really kind of focused on the idea of compression, these kind of devices that they have to kind of put on individuals. We were, of course, inspired by the EAMS and all of their splint work that they did. And then we were also inspired by all of these little contraptions that they have to put people into when they get hurt. So next slide. Next slide. Go back. Do it again. I just like that slide. Right. And so we started to, well, how can we kind of emulate this? And this is kind of our very much, junk show version of prototyping, right? So we started prototyping so many different ways to clamp the hose. We started doing rudimentary clamps, We started getting pieces of kind of steel and really binding this thing in and looking at the straps and pulling these kind of hoses back and forth to really see what would be the effects in our prototyping kind of these concrete columns. Next slide. And we also were looking at the color variation as well. And so when we took these off, these were the initial prototypes. There are these kind of weird looking little totems that kind of have this really amazing kind of form to them. They have, you can see where certain binding techniques or compression techniques, really started to create this family of kind of columns that kind of emerged. Next. More slides of that. You can see the scale of kind of the pinching, Next slide.
So parallel to this process, part of our brief was to do some community outreach. And this was kind of an interesting project to even just ask the question, well, who is the community? Because Onion Creek is a really new neighborhood. And in fact, it was kind of a concern of AFD's because at one of their whatever outreach they had done, I think 2 people had showed up. There's a lot of new apartment complexes and not much directly adjacent to this site. So that, there's not a well-established neighborhood association. There's not, a whole bunch of stories that kind of clicked at this place. But what there is a giant high school just down the road. So we got together with the art teacher at that high school and organized an afternoon of workshops with her senior class, and that was when we were starting to explore this question of fire hoses. So we thought they could help us with that question. And so we brought to the workshops a whole bunch of materials that simulated fire hose, straws and pipe cleaners and domestic fire hose, and then various methods of attaching them, and asked them to think about what these could become, what kind of sculpture or artful installation it could become at the fire station. So it had the effect of letting them know that there is a new fire station going in down the road, which none of them knew. And what we also hope is it'll, once there's something there in the fall, it'll kind of connect them to that, give them greater insight that they'll hopefully share with their friends about what it is. And they were really an engaging group to work with and came up with all kinds of whimsical designs. And one of the things that made an impression on us when we were collecting the photos of the maquettes afterwards was that actually there was so much more that could be going on with this piece than just being a fence, which, as Robbie had mentioned, was the initial brief at the beginning of the project. So what we had imagined when we started making the columns was, oh, this is our sort of fence mechanism, and we're going to aggregate these around the parking lot, and there'll be a super cool fence. But after working with the students, we began to think, could they do something else? And actually, in conversation with the project team too, so the representatives from AFD and EMS, we started proposing, well, what happens if these come off the fence and do something else on the site? And they were actually really enthusiastic about that, because the fence is kind of set back from the road, and from the intersection you don't really see it. There's a couple of trees in front of it. And we started investigating, could it instead be more of a neighborhood marker or a wayfinding, a path marking device instead? And they were really enthusiastic about the idea of bringing it out to the edge of the site, making it something that people passing by in cars would notice, that if there is pedestrian traffic, it would sort of encourage you up to the front door of the fire station. And it helped kind of connect back to the brief, which had also asked us to address the city's first responders' commitment to the community. So it really felt like it made a stronger interface between the facility and the community at which it's in. So this is kind of where we're currently at. In plan, you can see there's essentially a sidewalk it's a corner site, and there's a sidewalk that runs along it, and then this pedestrian path from that to the visitor parking lot. So what we're proposing is that there's a piece that hugs the edge of that sidewalk and then also marks that pedestrian path, and kind of also delineates spaces that start to suggest a kind of garden-like space or a sort of meditation type walk, which we hope can tie to the kind of need for EMS and fire employees to have a kind of a space for therapeutic sort of decompressing and interaction after a lot of the stressful stuff that they go through on a daily basis.
Oh, right. So here, this is where we currently are. Again, as Lucy mentioned, kind of we're in the technical, drawing phase. We realized that with the allocated budget that we have, we can, fabricate about 52 of these totems, columns, whatever you like to call them. And next. And we're also, trying to develop a systemization kind of the forming currently. So our team has been looking at how can we kind of systemize this, learning from our prototyping phase of how can we really control this column or the totem of each one, and then how does it adjust? So that's currently where we are.
Yeah. So we invite you all to detour through Onion Creek in the fall, I think sometime in October, and see it going in, or come by afterwards, and also stop to say hi to the new fire and EMS staff at the facility. Thanks.
Thanks. Do you want me to go over there?
I'll sit over here and I'll shout questions. I actually Actually, I'm going to start with two questions maybe at the same time that I think are interrelated. I don't know, maybe they're not. But one of the, first I want to say it's such an inspiring body of work, isn't it? I mean, I think that's something that is really incredible. And I think for me personally, whenever I find out you're doing a new project, which they're not very many, right? No, I mean, like, they're few and far between. It's not like you're cranking out 10 new works every year. Is that it's always something I think really surprising, and at first, like, it'll never work. I mean, there's always like a kind of a surprising quality to that. So, I guess the first question would be if you can account for, like, have you ever thought about repeating yourself? Or, I mean, you know, you have like a garden project, and then you've got a hydraulic project, and then it's a lighting project. I mean, they're like very different and very challenging realms of just, and now you're working with concrete casting and fabric, right, which is a completely different thing. And I guess the other question that may be related to that, if you could talk a little bit about, I'm very curious about like your working method as a collaboration, you know, how that has evolved or how that has developed.
Go ahead.
I think it would be a much smarter business move if we did more repeating ourselves. And we don't even have a specific intention not to. I think that we would actually, because we learn so much through every project, and once you've done it once, you're like, now I know how to do this. I could do it so much better.
I'm never going to do it again.
I'm never going to. I could do it much better the next time.
Right.
There are a couple of things in there that you can see the threads, in particular the fence from Grand Center, which definitely informed a lot of the work on the YMCA garden, and even some of the techniques with which we engage people in the making of our pieces. We definitely bring that knowledge from one artwork to the next. I will say that one of the things that we find challenging, and I would love to find a way to get better at, is that we're always reacting to calls. So something, either we get invited to do something, or there's an open call which we respond to. And in those cases, it's not so obvious, like, oh, we've got this project ready to go, and we could just manipulate it a bit and make it another version. They're always very specific. And in public art, they're always often it's really about relating to the sort of specific narrative and identity of that place. But we're also, in each project, you also do it and then think, well, this could be really great to, the community garden's a good example. We've done this once, this could be a great model for us or someone else to do again. But it actually takes some time and resources to initiate projects on your own and create those frameworks. And we're always working with really modest budgets, and we're always stretched on our time. And we haven't yet necessarily just found a good way to how to sort of create that space for putting together our own frameworks and advancing agendas. I would like to think that that's kind of a specific goal in the next few years. We did write a report after the YMCA that was meant to be for AIPP. Here's how you could do this again.
Yeah, and I think they're each unique, kind of, to Lucy's point, briefs and then material experiments as well. Like, we kind of treat the whole studio, with all of our team who's over there. Everyone should raise your hand. Who are amazing collaborators, as well. So each project is really that great chance to kind of reimagine something, and to look at that really interesting brief, like a fence, and it kind of comes out of the process in a kind of academic sense, right? Let's just treat it like an immersion into kind of the project itself, and then we make really complicated things, or we make really simple things complicated. Sorry. So we will complicate the most simple thing, but we learn so much, and I think that's from a business perspective, obviously, we could probably do better, but it's also it keeps our team invigorated, I think, and it keeps us, kind of developing and always looking at kind of new ideas and stuff. So.
I'm curious, so say when you're working collaboratively, you're working in the office environment, so all the projects that come in now, everybody's involved from the very beginning in a kind of charrette-like scenario, or like once you get, I'm just curious, like, because in a group setting, like once you start along a path, like are there dissenting voices, or is everybody like, yes, we're going to cast in fire hose, that's I mean, but don't you ever, like, at a certain moment, somebody says, this is stupid, let's not do this. I have a totally different idea.
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
I think all the time. I mean, I think
Usually Robbie.
Yeah, we really churn through ideas. I mean, I think we've come up with some really bad ideas, and we've probably implemented some really bad ideas before. But I would like to think that it's kind of an open collaboration. You know, we really try to, you know, create the atmosphere that everyone kind of bring ideas to the table from a teamwork standpoint. You know,
I think there's some sort of basic, sort of spatial things that are sort of simple but essential to how we work too. And one is that we're all in one small room together. And so even if you're not formally sort of designated on the project, you tend to know what's going on just through the background chatter and drawings laying on the table. And so definitely in those early phases where, you know, ideas are being chucked around, it's very easy to sort of, you know, casually, you know, give your opinion or put something on the wall and talk about it while someone eats a sandwich. And then the other aspect of it is we actually don't have a sort of formal workshop space, but we are in a little compound that has outdoors, a sort of courtyard space and sort of messy space that we can store materials in, and a tool shed. And so when we're prototyping stuff, it's like right outside our front door, and it doesn't need to be tidied up at the end of the day. And so like those hoses have been hanging out on our front porch every day, and as you come and go, you kind of look at them and add a new opinion. So there is a lot of that sort of informal, sort of studio-like aspect to the process for sure.
Are you guys are you building everything, all the public art? Like, are you going to actually cast the yourselves and everything?
Yeah, we are. I mean, one of our team members, Connor, who is kind of essential in making and kind of building stuff with us. We're going to build them with him, and he's going to be. So he's been doing all the prototypical work, and then people will go kind of out of the studio and have a day and kind of prototype. And so.
What is the budget for
It is $90,000 for design and construction.
Right.
Where do you see your practice going in 10 or 20 years?
One of the things we thought, we like doing this kind of opportunity because it forces us to think about that question a bit, sometimes that we might not in the day-to-day of just trying to get things done. But one of the things that occurred to us when we were putting these together is, I think there are clear ways that architectural thinking comes into public art projects here. Like I think you can tell from our public art projects that we've got architectural backgrounds in a way that others might. So I think we think about site in quite an analytical way, and also our projects always tend to have sort of purpose and function that I think comes from. It's rare for us to just build a piece of sculpture, although maybe the last one you could say is. It sort of has some wayfinding path things to do with it. So I think you can kind of see the ways that architectural thinking has come into the art projects. But we're not convinced that we've done a great job yet of bringing the sort of art ways of thinking into our architecture projects yet. So
Greater integration.
Yeah, I think some of the things that we would sort of identify as more studio art ways of is this sort of prototyping and workshop-based way of working, like literally working with the material to decide what it is and what it could be. And also working from, architecture projects are always starting at the scale of the site and working down, whereas in an art project like AIPP, you start with this sort of thing, and then you're like, okay, what could it do on the site? What could it be? So going from detail to a larger scale. I think, and also then just the sort of participatory making, the idea that you can kind of bring stakeholders into the actual making process. So all that happens in our public artwork, and we'd love to find a way to start bringing that into our architecture work, which we don't so much. Again, not because we're intentionally not, but just the sort of processes and protocols of practicing architecture are they're very sort of ingrained and rigid, and I think there's lots of opportunities to bring that stuff more into the building project. An Austin style?
An East Austin style.
Oh, are you talking about in general or with our?
Unique iconic school of design is everyone understands to be us.
Oh, that's a good question.
That is a good question.
Robbie can take that.
Yes. I think so. I think, there's so many talented kind of creative people that are brought to Austin or attracted to Austin. And, over Murray, you could tell if I'm wrong, but, since, I don't know, like 2004 was when I came to Austin, but around 2006 or something, it really kind of blossomed in terms of just kind of creative minds and people that really started flooding the city. And I think, I think other creative people want other creative people around because it kind of sets the standard higher, which is great. I think when everyone's doing great work, everyone's doing great work. And so I think if all of us can continue to kind of push, the culture in Austin to do amazing architecture, amazing art, I think it enriches the place and it makes it a much more kind of progressive kind of environment. So,
I think. Oh.
I was just going to add, just as a question too. I mean, Austin loves a party, right? So, I think I do see temporary pavilion, temporary pieces like Creek Show, and remember First Night? You did that for a while, and even Art House Commission.
Right.
Pop. I think that seems to be an emerging way of very Austin. People will show up if you have beer and roof.
Exactly.
But so that leads me to another question, like temporary versus permanent. If that's a lot of the projects you showed were temporary installations. Maybe just the last one was a permanent. Was this the only permanent one you showed?
The last two.
Oh, the garden, right? The garden.
Yeah.
Maybe you can speak to that.
We have some other permanent ones. I think. Why did we just show on this?
Most of, I would say probably 2/3 of the work that we've done is temporary, though. And, well, it's harder to do permanent work, for sure.
Right. I think the budgets are, what's happening now is you're seeing a lot of national artists who are super talented, really noticing the point that we were just talking about. Like, wow, Austin is really, part of the commissioning agent, or it's in a progressive kind of place within the United States in which it's embracing, progressive like public artworks. So there's some really great kind of people that are working here, now, and I think for us we kind of fluctuate a little bit. We kind of go to building for a while and we'll do, houses, and then we're like, man, we're kind of bored of designing bathrooms, but we love bathrooms and kitchens and exactly. So the temporary is that opportunity to kind of invigorate the office, get into that design thinking mentality again, to where we're not so obsessing about everything like tile line and like exactly.
One of the things that we have definitely learned about sort of temporary versus permanent work and the nature of each, apart from sort of the obvious one that permanent has to last for longer, is that for temporary, like the success of permanent ones is sort of their ability to speak to people over time and age well in place and sort of stay relevant and be able to adapt to the change around it. Temporary ones, like the success of them is really embedded in a larger sort of infrastructure around the event. And actually the ones that we've done that have felt most successful is when the kind of event that brings people to the piece is larger than just the piece itself. So the Creek Show is a good example. Like, there was so much effort in that project that was outside just the pieces that the artists and architects were making, that was to do with, you know, the graphic design and marketing and organization and music and food and everything to do with the event, that was a whole sort of ecology of the event that, you know. And same with the Grand Center one, the opening of that was lined up to coincide with the spring art walk that they have that goes between all the art museums. And so we were a stop on that. So they already had an audience of 2,000 or whatever who are naturally going to be stopping by there, versus it was much more of a challenge in the Escaped Infrastructure one, where it was just like, here's this thing, and how are we going to get everyone to this thing and recognizing it? Yeah, and I think, right. And then like, temporary is temporary, but whether it's a one-day temporary or a 6-week temporary, it's like a really different.
6 weeks might as well be permanent.
Yeah, it's a really different project, kind of, because.
Storytelling.
Yeah.
6 weeks, we got it.
Well, part of the success of the temporary is when it's in this compressed time frame of a weekend, there's this urgency to get there, and it creates like the density of people to make it successful. Whereas over the 6 weeks, like, oh, I can see it any time. And
oh, did I miss that?
yeah, exactly. So that's definitely a key part of it.
It's a two-part question. So you were mentioning that in Austin, a lot of artists or architects or creatives have been coming here for the last 10 years or so. And that's wonderful. However, by looking at your projects, it seems, at least what you showed tonight, 2/3 of them are out of the city. So what I'd like to know is, how do you equate that financially with the growth, with the influx of artists here and the growth of payable, workable projects that will sustain you? How do you do that? And then the second part of the question is, where is that happening in the United States? Is it in Austin, or is it elsewhere, where the finances are to sustain Thoughtbarn?
I think it's in diversity of project type. So I think we would probably argue that we kind of invest back into the practice in a sense. So there's a term, loss leader, you know, where it's kind of a loss leader atmosphere. But then you have projects that are kind of more financially successful that can kind of offset, you know, the cultural things as well. You know, so I think when we look at, that's how we kind of invest. You know, we have done and are doing more art projects in Austin, you know, currently. We've got a couple of private commissions. And then to, I guess, the second question, were you asking we have to go somewhere else to do the work?
Essentially. As so many artists are moving out because of the unaffordability.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I think that is a great question about, you know, how can we afford to kind of stay here? You know, a 10 to 20-year question would be, well, we would love to have a big warehouse workshop where, you know, everything is kind of integrated. We're, you know, we've got a studio over here, we've got tools, and yeah, we're finding that harder to do. You know, rents are more expensive here, and you know, it's a financial challenge. But I think as a growing city, you know, I think it's growing into a city in a sense. I mean, Austin maybe wasn't a very large city, you know, but now it's kind of growing into what could be recognized as kind of hopefully a world-class city. You know, get some more cultural institutions and getting all those things kind of established, I think. So yeah, it's a difficult question. I hope people keep hiring us.
So you're not doing work outside of Austin because to find new projects just because you're good, right? People want you to do it. It's different than, say, painters who have known, or sculptors in Austin that can't make a living here and have had to go to Houston or New York or LA. That's a different
Correct.
whole, I think.
Yeah, but
yeah, I think so. We have, and in fact, we haven't done any out-of-town projects are really hard financially, actually. And so I would say, and we haven't done any recently, partly through sort of, you can only do 1 or 2 of those at a time, because going, especially for the, you know, public art projects are usually you're trying to stretch the budget as far as possible, and when you're paying for airfares and shipping materials and also just your time to meet people, you have to take a couple of days out of your schedule. They are definitely not the ones that sustain the project, but they are the ones that, you know, allow you to work in a new environment and expand your networks and all the, you know, the great things about getting to travel. So.
Have you already completed, or are you still working on it? Because when I was looking at the poles, I thought it was a really cool idea that used the hoses, but I was thinking we could make like totem poles by putting the cement of the tools that medics use on top of them and going over them and making different designs or faces or whatever. So more people would go there to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
So I just have this totem pole idea that's great. And they're made out of hoses. You can done a lot more.
We'll incorporate that. We have to. Yeah, do you need royalties?
That's a cool idea.
I'm curious, when you're doing projects through the public art project, is there a norm as to what your responsibility is with either like maintenance or, if one of those hoses falls over because there was a storm? Is there a norm to what? Can you talk about that?
There is, and it's quite well sort of described through. Art in Public Places has been around since 1985, so they've commissioned a lot of work and they've learned what it means to look after work. And so just sort of basically in your contract, you're responsible for, you have to warranty the piece for a year, and then it becomes AIPP's responsibility to take care of it after that. And as part of your deliverable, you're asked to put together a maintenance manual. And actually, we felt like this was kind of new from when we did the YMCA garden to this one, is that almost the first deliverable that was asked for after the sort of basic concept was approved was the maintenance manual, because they needed to get it to the conservator to review and give feedback and get back to us before we had finished our final design. So, and that we didn't remember having to do that in the garden one. So I think they're always evolving how sort of best practices of how to take care of the artwork. And, you know, just in when you propose a material to use, or, you know, if it has an interactive element for it, you know, a sophisticated client like AIPP has been doing this long enough to kind of ask the difficult questions about, well, how's that going to work after this long? Or, you know, we know that this color fades in the sun, or whatever.
Our collection is coming up on 35 years in a couple years now. So we're just now seeing the lifespan of these works come through. Mm-hmm. And so we're trying to implement ways in the contracts to make sure that the pieces are able to be withheld for 20 years. That's the lifespan of the artwork that we expect. And that's written into the contract. And then, yeah, the artist is responsible for a 1-year warranty. And there's a number of reviews that happen with the stakeholders and with the arts conservator, professional arts conservator, to help us, inform the artist so that they can design for that time span, and then also help us gain knowledge in how to make things last and be beautiful for the city for that amount of time.
And actually, one of the very straightforward requests we had from the project team was, could we make 3 extra columns that they could just keep in storage in case something did happen? So,
yeah.
Well, I was just going to say that also the funding for AIPP can't cover maintenance. It's
No.
capital improvement project money, and so the challenge is finding money through the other departments and to maintain
They need
them.
to change.
The way the ordinance is written, the funding can only be spent on the commissioning of artwork at that location. It can't be spent for future maintenance. So we're working on funding it through other ways so that we can keep our collection great. But it is, you know, a challenge to utilize public funds in a respectful and, you know, fiscally responsible way.
But there are, I wanted to add something because I think over the years, you know, the capital improvement, if people don't know, you know, basically 2% of capital projects go towards public art, which is actually like quite incredible. So at the airport now, for instance, Janet Eckelman's piece, Mark Fornay's, it's over $1 million, right? I mean, these are significant.
3 million.
Yeah.
3 million.
Yeah.
Okay. This is public artwork that's a $3 million commission. It's like a sizable building project. Janet's piece is 2 million, and Clay Odom, I found out recently.
Another 200,000.
Right, and he's a local artist who lives around the corner. He's a very talented guy. So at that 200, I mean, you're getting to the point where you can actually, you know, support yourself, and it doesn't have to be cultural contribution. So I think, I mean, there are a tremendous number of projects. I'd encourage everybody to kind of like, I mean, you can go to the Art in Public Places panel meetings where the projects are being discussed and being formed. I mean, it's public money. You can go there, and if you're interested and have input, or just find out what's going on. But it's really, I mean, I find it incredible. It's like mailing something. You know, you put a stamp on it, you can send it around the world. It's like one of those things I think is like a miracle. It's, no, you know, that we have a $3 million single commission occurring at the airport, and you know, keep it quiet.
That'll bring out the haters for sure.
Right.
So maybe we'll take, did we have one more question?
I'll let you know the day they have the panel discussion.
Just a quick question. Do you team up, I arrived early, assuming it's earlier, do you team up with educational institutions like UT School of Architecture or St. Edward's or other schools like that?
On projects?
On projects or team with students?
Yeah, we, you know, I think a lot of these projects have some kind of involvement with a local institution, be it a high school, middle school, after school program, whatever. I think we have not done anything with
Need an
the...
intern.
What's that?
I think he's looking for an internship.
Well, I was wondering if a, say, architecture or artistic student at, for example, grad school in Austin wanted to do a thesis statement and they convinced you that was what you out, would that be a potential team up?
Sure. Well,
would you be the right venue to go through, or would be there a different venue you would recommend?
So the proposition is that you have a thesis work, and
I don't have.
Oh, okay.
Counseling in the future.
Well, you know, I think the University of Texas is pretty particular about how they allow like design build projects to kind of happen. So it's, I mean, through the experience of kind of teaching there and working there and kind of seeing what they allow to happen, they're relatively particular about, you know, what they sponsor. We would love to. I mean, and majority of the times, Murray, you can comment to this too. Like, it's through a studio, you know.
Yeah, we've done a couple of like Design 5 at the architecture school where we'll take commission work and have the students kind of design it.
Right. So I think you can do it. I think the timing and all that.
But there is an AIPP mentorship program.
There is.
yeah, that's such a cool program.
Launchpad. We have a Launchpad artist here right now, Lisa Woods. She's working with Mark Fornes on his project at the airport. And it's a great opportunity. You can look it up, austincreates.com. It's our website. I encourage anyone interested in learning from a commissioned artist to look at that program.
And you get paid too.
Yes.
The paid internship.
Flat fee.
And the Tempo program
Tempo's
is
great.
really emerging as a cool program as a venue for emerging public artists to get their feet wet, or cross from studio art practice into public art with, you know, a budget that will kind of cover materials and some time, and you know, and also in a kind of supportive atmosphere with other artists doing projects that you can kind of learn from and support each other.
Yes. So before you leave, I wanted to thank Murray and also Thoughtbarn and Texas Society of Architects for having us at this beautiful venue tonight. I also wanted to put a plug in. The way that you can support us is by filling out your surveys. That's how we collect information and report it back up to the mayor and everyone else who cares to know how AIPP is doing. So think about filling that out. Also, we are conducting right now a creative space survey. We talked about kind of the money crunch and the space crunch for artists in Austin. So we're asking artists, what kind of space do you need? There's a little flyer. You can go to the website and fill it out. I think the survey will be open indefinitely, but they're going to pull the information in September and kind of collate it and report it back up. So also look into that. We would really appreciate it. And thank you guys for coming.